Welcome to the Butterfly interview. My name is Kirsten, and thank you so much, Richard, for joining Badu Cafe in this interview. We're very grateful to have you here and really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us in your busy schedule.
Very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No, thank you. Our topic today is identity and how identity is developed and maintained, especially in relation to the exposure to social media and increasing phone addiction we experience these days. And also how mindfulness and meditation might change the impact on identity and our relationship to social media and possible phone addiction. So Dr. Richard Davidson is best known for his groundbreaking work studying emotion and the brain. His research is broadly focused on the neural basis of emotion and emotional style, as well as methods to promote human flourishing, including meditation and related contemplative practices. Richard is a friend and confidant of the Dalai Lama. He is a highly sought-after expert and speaker, leading conversations on well-being on international stages, such as the World Economic Forum, where he served on the Global Council on Mental Health. And I would also like to welcome Jigme Sogyal and Dr. Ben Isbell, who will lead the interview today. Jigme Sogyal's bright career spans 25 years as a Waldorf educator. She has cultivated a niche in facilitating parent and teacher education programs and conducts comprehensive courses, including public speaking, team building, language, and communication skills. These are uniquely designed to cultivate well-being, mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. Her expertise has been sought after internationally with programs delivered in the United States of America, India, Singapore, and Nepal. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kirsten, for having me. It's a pleasure.
And then I'll introduce Dr. Ben Isbell. Ben Isbell is a mindfulness teacher with over 25 years experience, spanning both traditional Buddhist meditation techniques and contemporary psychological approaches to mindfulness. As an academic and cognitive neuroscientist, Ben has studied the use of mindfulness to prevent age-related cognitive decline and dementia. Having left academic research, Ben now focuses on developing innovative methods to present the essential core of the Buddha's teachings in a way that is accessible and engaging. Thank you so much for being here, Ben.
Thank you for inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure to be part of the discussion today.
Thank you so much for joining this interview, and I now hand over to you, Richard, Jigme Sogyal, and Ben.
So welcome, and I just wanted to, this is a big question we have been dealing with, and we're just so grateful to have Richard here. As an educator, I have spent many years teaching young people to flourish and to reach their full potential. And I'm adding little quotation marks here because I want to believe that I have been teaching, and there certainly has been some of that, and helping them foster healthy relationships and cultivate loving kindness and all different positive qualities. And however, what I have noticed over the years, and my colleagues agree with this, is that what makes the biggest difference, it seems to us, based on our observations, is who walks through the door, who is there, the adult around the child, the young person. We observe that when an adult who comes through is authentic, is genuine, really cares, something is happening that we cannot tell. And these influences seem to help develop a healthy sense of identity, which in turn helps them accomplish their goals in life. Now, we really don't know what the magic is, and we would like to know, what is it that science is telling us about the way children and adolescents develop this sense of identity And is there such a thing as a healthy or unhealthy identity? What influences from your work and your experience seem most relevant when developing such types of identity?
Yeah, so thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work you are collectively doing to bring these teachings to a wider swath of humanity. The questions you're asking are complex and really don't have simple answers. But let me say a few things. First, you refer to qualities that an adult may bring to a relationship with uh, a developing child. And one of the important insights in the description that you just gave is a very simple but really important one, and that is that children learn a lot through social learning. They learn a lot osmotically. They learn a lot through the way a caregiver or an adult embodies certain qualities of kindness, of compassion, or of presence, whatever those qualities might be. It also could be negative qualities. But this is one of the principal routes through which kids learn. And so this really underscores something critically important, and that is that in order to cultivate wholesome qualities and enable our youth to flourish, one of the most important things that we could do as adults is to cultivate those qualities in ourselves. Not to not to tell children that they should be kind or in some conceptual way do that, but rather to embody these qualities. And it's through the embodiment of these qualities that kids will learn. So that's one really important aspect, which we can unpack if you wish. The second issue you raised is about identity. And identity is really complex, and and we, I think it would be fair to say we really don't have a deep understanding of the mechanisms, if you will, through which identity is formed in a kind of granular way. We have psychological theories about how those processes develop, but they're pretty coarse, if you will, and not that well defined. One of the most important things about identity in relation to flourishing is that, and this is something you alluded to in the introduction to this conversation, identities can change. Identities are not fixed. And having an experiential appreciation for the plasticity of identity is itself the key, I believe, to the relationship between identity and flourishing. So the idea that whatever identity we are operating with at any given point in time is temporary, it's impermanent, it's not, it doesn't define our complete personhood. And having an experiential glimpse of that is liberating, because it affords the possibility that our world is not strictly defined by the identity that we are transiently adopting. Now, one of the other things I'll say now, and then I'll pause, is that for many youth, as well as many adults, identity operates under the hood, so to speak. That is, we are not always aware of the identities that are filtering our perception of reality. And yet those identities play a very important role in determining the world in which we live. We are literally constructing our worlds based on our identities. And one of the keys, therefore, to flourish is to loosen the grip that any identity has, to change our relationship, if you will, to our identities. Not so much to change our identities, but to change our relationship to our identities so that they don't hijack us and completely dictate the way we perceive the world.
I mean, Richard, thank you so much. This is already so illuminating. And in the beginning, you mentioned that you'll be willing to unpack a little bit this osmosis that happens between the young human being and the adult who is present. And I'm wondering there, what is the mechanism, that is at work? Because I'm wondering, does this have some connection to the formation of this identity as well as all that comes with it? So we'd like to explore that a little bit more. How is this happening?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it is, I think, likely happening through many different mechanisms. It's not just one mechanism, and certainly the role of identity is important, although I would say that it is one of several mechanisms that are operating. So, for example, one component of the social learning that a child may osmotically absorb is simply about awareness, about being present. It's not about identity. It's simply about being present, being undistracted, being fully available. And it may touch on identity, but it is something even more basic, I would say, than identity. And so that's one example of how the embodiment of these qualities in a teacher or a caregiver is going to impact a child. And I should just say that we know from hard-nosed experimental research, and this is work that we've recently done, that when teachers are taught skills of well-being so that they actually are showing up more present for their students, they're showing up more connected to their students, they're showing up with a greater awareness of their purpose when they're with the students, when they're in that space of flourishing, their students actually do better. So the students, and they don't just do better in social and emotional spheres, they actually do better academically. And this is based on hard-nosed, rigorous research where we have been able to demonstrate this. And so this is not just a theory, but really there is substantial evidence to show that these social learning kinds of principles deeply affect the capacity of our children to actually learn.
Again, thank you. This is, what you're revealing might be news for many folks who place a lot of emphasis or importance on the purely academic, area of life. So, thank you for, clarifying this. And I heard you, and I understand what you're saying, that it is our relationship to personality that is the where it hinges, and how maybe we can explore that a little bit more in terms of healthy and unhealthy sense of identity, not to hold on to the identity, but to offer a little contrast to our listeners so that we know when have I walked away really far from my more natural way of being? What would tell me that I'm walking away from that, and that maybe I can come back and home to this awareness that you're talking about that's present in the children, this presence, this availability. So maybe you could illustrate a little bit, give us a little scenario, how would people know that we have walked away from that center?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that when we are hijacked by uh, uh, aspects of identity, it will color the way we see the world, and it will um, uh, uh, we won't be able to fully appreciate all that is available for us to take in, if you will, because when you're hijacked by a particular identity, you're viewing the world from that perspective. And so one, simple exercise that a person can do is, if they're in a situation that's challenging, they can simply envision what it might be like to face that situation if they had a different sense of identity, a different identity. Just try it on in their mind. Imagine that they're looking at the world through a different kind of lens. And how would things look if they adopted another perspective? So if you adopted the perspective of a person who has a different identity, for example, what would of identity, and help uh, um, uh, youth, or for that matter, adults, appreciate that an identity is, as we talked about earlier, is impermanent, and it can change. And that is itself liberating.
Thank you again. And I think at this point, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Ben Isbell, who might take us to the next level. Thank you so much.
Wow, it's just been fascinating listening to the discussion so far. And I'd really like to just pick up on a couple of things that you mentioned there, Richard. First of all, hijacking. When we get hijacked, this is, to me, a really, really important aspect of our internal and external life, is where we get hijacked by our environment or our thoughts and feelings. And it comes back to this idea of identity being malleable. We are learning this. We are training. We are developing our identity through the way we deploy our attention almost. And this hijacking is interesting because I think for a lot of us, young people, old people, all of us, we are hijacked so much by social media usage, mobile phone usage, and we find ourselves more and more immersed in this mentally, digitally created universe of sense of identity through deploying our attention again and again into our mobile phones and our social media and becoming wrapped up in that. And the interesting part about this that I'd like to discuss is how if we do this again and again with our attention, we activate something really incredible as human beings. We are designed and we have evolved to quickly automate a behavior or a process that we repeat again and again. When we deploy our attention into our phones and our social media devices, then if we do it again and again, it just becomes more effortless, more spontaneous, and more unconscious. And so we find ourselves unconsciously reaching for our phone, immersing ourselves in this stuff. And this is then having a feedback loop effect upon how I'm constructing our sense of identity. And as you mentioned there, wonderfully put, it happens under the hood. From a psychological perspective, these automated behaviors have three really important characteristics. When we automate something, it becomes effortless, spontaneous, and unconscious. This last one, as you said, under the hood, unconscious. The problem being when we're hijacked, we don't even know we've been hijacked by definition because it's an automatic behavior. And so I'd like to just quickly hear your perspective on this from the research and the fields that you've been exploring about how we are shaping the brain and how that's therefore shaping our sense of identity and our interaction back out into the world through this deployment of attention into these new and emerging things like mobile phones and social media. And I understand this is just a nascent field, an emerging field of research.
Yeah, well, thank you for setting it up and situating the problem in the way you did. And I certainly agree with you that one of the ways that I often put this is that we are all participants in a grand experiment for which none of us have provided our informed consent. And that is the reality of the exposure that we have to social media, to digital devices, and so forth, that are very much hijacking our minds and our brains. Now, you described the typical view of a habit where it becomes automatic and spontaneous and unconscious. But one important insight that we derive from our work is that it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be unconscious. We can actually have conscious habits. I meditate every day. That's a conscious habit. I'm aware when I meditate. That's a conscious habit. I don't do that mindlessly. And so we can cultivate conscious habits. That's one thing. The second thing is that from a scientific perspective, one of the ways we think about attention is we divide it into two broad classes. One class of attention we talk about as being stimulus captured, where our attention is being pulled by stuff out there. The other form of attention we call endogenously driven. That is, it's voluntary. We voluntarily deploy our attention. So if I asked you right now to please direct your attention to your right foot,
yeah,
that is an example of voluntary deployment of attention. And, there's a range of skill that exists in any population. Some people can do that pretty easily. Some people find that impossible. So there's a normal distribution, if you will. But one of the things we know, and I would say we know pretty definitively, is that wherever you are on that curve, you can improve. That is, we can actually learn to better voluntarily regulate our attention. And so rather than having our attention be stimulus captured, and one of the metaphors for stimulus captured attention would be like a sailboat that is without a rudder that is being blown around on a turbulent sea. That is what our minds are like most of the time. And it doesn't have to be that way. We can actually cultivate that inner rudder, if you will, by learning to voluntarily deploy attention. And one of the aspects of that is there was a study done not too long ago in the United States that found that the average adult in the United States opens their phone 152 times a day. I think most people would agree that's not necessary to open your phone 152 times a day. We can learn to regulate our behavior, regulate our attention, so that it is more endogenously driven rather than stimulus captured. And I would go further to say that this kind of learning or educating attention is something that needs to be incorporated into our educational systems. And the fact that we don't do it systematically is nothing short of a moral failing. William James in 1890, in the Principles of Psychology, in his chapter on attention, talked about educating attention. We've known for more than 100 years in the Western psychological literature that we can educate attention. And the fact that we don't do it systematically is, I think, really deeply problematic. And I think this is something that we really need to bring into K through 12 education.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's a wonderful place marker, that William James quote from Principles of Psychology, that the faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the root of all foundation, will, and judgment, and is the making of a man. I think that's I mean, as you say, we've known this for a while, but this faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is what you're talking about with conscious behavior, conscious habits, which stands in opposition to this unconscious, automatic, spontaneous habit that we have. I mean, a recent study suggests that we spend 50 to 95% of our waking life engaged in habitual behaviors, habitually responding to our world, which, if you think about this, is interesting because that's an unconscious, automatic process. So we're essentially sleepwalking through a large part of our day and life, which means we're missing it, right? So this thing about what are we doing with our attention and how are we automating it? The reason I bring up the mobile phone and the social media use is because there's an emerging body of research that suggests that problematic or addictive use of these modalities is associated with adverse physical and mental health outcomes, higher rates of depression and stress and anxiety, and lower physical health outcomes. And so it seems like we're kind of entraining some processes that are leading to an adverse outcome. But then we also have this kind of well-established body of research regarding exposure to nature, blue and green spaces, the oceans and forests and things like that, which seems to have a different impact on us. It seems that this kind of exposure, when we deploy our attention and immerse ourselves in these natural settings, has a beneficial effect. It raises our level of happiness and well-being, has beneficial effects on both physical and mental health. So it seems to tap into this idea that you're speaking about, that we are very malleable. We have this inherent plasticity, but we're not in control of it at the moment. And so I'd like to hear a little bit more of how do we take the reins back of this? How do we get control? Because it seems to me from the work that you've done, especially in meditation and mindfulness, that these techniques might offer a sophisticated tool for harnessing and channeling this inherent plasticity and responsiveness for a specific goal, which is flourishing, enhancing happiness and well-being. And so just if you could talk a little bit about that, and then what I'd really love for us is to have something to take away in terms of a technique like that. So maybe you could guide us through a little exercise, perhaps.
Certainly, yeah, happy to do all that. First, you alluded to research on the impact of nature, being in blue and green spaces on well-being, and there is a growing scientific literature that does indeed indicate that even short exposures to natural environments has a beneficial effect on the mind and the brain. The famous evolutionary biologist at Harvard by the name of E.O. Wilson invented the word biophilia. to characterize humans' affinity for nature. And I think this is something real and something important. And so to the extent that we can maximize our exposure to green space and nature in this way, it's great. Unfortunately, the disadvantaged populations in the world are the ones that are less likely to have the opportunities to be exposed to green space. And so I think that this sort of uncovers a lot of systemic injustice that is part of the problem and will eventually need to be addressed in a more comprehensive solution. That's for another time. But with respect to simple practices that can help us take the reins back, as you suggest, I think we being the collective we, know something about that, and it's built on 2,500 years of contemplative first-person research. The contemplatives knew about this long before the scientists did. The scientists, have only discovered it very, very recently, and we've been able to confirm that indeed these are simple methods that, if nothing else, we can certainly say that they are strategies that we can use to educate our attention. And the cool thing is that we don't need any kind of special apparatus. We don't need any special place. We don't need any special time. This can be done anywhere, anytime. The only thing we need is to be awake and to have our own mind. And so, I'm happy at whatever point you wish to guide a simple practice where we can all get perhaps a little taste of this kind of benefit.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I think that's really interesting, a taste, right? And this goes back to where we began about this idea of it's not conceptual. Like right at the beginning, we talked about how identity is shaped by those around us embodying behaviors. And so this idea of we need a taste of it. And so it's not enough just to have an intellectual understanding of things. We need an experience, because much of our behavior is automatic, as I said. And to pick up on another thing you mentioned there, the fact that our scientific body of evidence, for which the gold standard is empirical peer review, right? Replication and peer review. That's our gold standard for evidence. And as you mentioned, these techniques, I like to say, have a 2,500-year history of empirical peer review. So it's quite a rigorously established technique. So the idea of having an experience of it is really important, because we need some reference, as you mentioned, what it's like if I wasn't like this, if I wasn't always hijacked by these automatic behaviors. What is it like if I had a different identity, as you suggested, and having a taste of that through an experience of actually engaging in it. It's not enough to know about these practices. As you say, you meditate every day. It's something we have to engage in. And that takes a little bit of effort to control our attention. As you said, with that example of placing our attention on our right foot, we have to voluntarily place our attention there. And the difference between this and our habitual behaviors is it takes a little bit of effort initially. But the good news is we're malleable, we're changeable. And if we just do it enough, we'll automate it until this becomes effortless, this kind of thing. And so maybe we can try that now, just to become a little effortless.
If I may jump in one moment before
please.
we plunge into the practice, because picking up from a few things that you have both mentioned here, And thinking about our Bardo Cafe focus on ancient and modern wisdom and uncovering what the ancient contemplatives call dukkha, which is, this sense of discomfort or the unsatisfactory nature of life. And I like that Richard talked about a wandering, because the original meaning of dukkha is a bad axle space, really referring to a chariot's wheel, where the axle hasn't been properly aligned, and then it leads to a quite bumpy ride and makes it difficult to negotiate turns. And so I was just fascinated by the fact that you're, just so naturally bringing it there to this ancient wisdom, and yet this first person research that has been happening. And so first, I'm totally fascinated by that. And then Richard in the beginning mentioned awareness, availability, when we were speaking about educators, adults, anybody who is there, basically. And then does that mean that this awareness is like fixing that bad axle wheel space and bringing us back, on track to this fluid nature that you're talking about, this inherent fluidity that we know somehow is there and yet don't have a lot of guidance. So I would love to see how to do this, like hands-on, like how can somebody try this at home?
Yeah, so lots of things were mentioned, and let me just comment on a few things before we do the practice. First, on the issue that you raised, Ben, about having taste, and that we need the experience. One of the insights that we have from neuroscience, there are two fundamentally different kinds of learning. One kind of learning we call declarative learning, which is learning about things. It's conceptual learning. The second form of learning we call procedural learning. Procedural learning is skill-based. It is acquired through practice, and it is instantiated in completely different neural systems compared to declarative learning. So to give one example, we can read a book or go to a lecture and learn the value of honesty or the value of kindness. But will that make a person more honest or more kind? I think most people would agree, probably not. That's probably maybe useful, but it's not sufficient. In order to really produce these qualities, we need procedural learning in addition to declarative learning. We need practice, and it is through that practice and through also social learning, through embodiment in others, that we can acquire these kinds of skills. And this is why we've been led to this very simple but very radical conclusion that well-being is actually a skill. And it's not typically thought about in that way, but it is a skill that we know can be enhanced through practice. So I think that's something really important. Yeah, maybe I should just stop there and we can do a little practice.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. So for those who are listening or viewing this conversation, you might be in front of the screen. And if you are, we may wish to close our eyes so that we can decrease what is in front of us. You don't need to close your eyes. You can leave them gently open, whatever you're most comfortable with. And we like to sit in an upright posture that's not too tight, but also not too loose, so we can stay awake. And as we start a practice, however short it is, we always begin by reflecting on our motivation. Why are we doing what we're doing? And let's see if you can find within yourself a motivation that is actually altruistic, recognizing that calming our mind and opening our heart is beneficial not only for ourselves, but is beneficial for all the beings that we touch directly or indirectly. So let's take a few moments to simply reflect on our motivation and see if we can connect to this altruistic component and see the benefit, not only for ourselves, but extending way beyond ourselves. And now let's take a few moments to recognize awareness. Every human being is endowed with this capacity for awareness. And this capacity is present all the time. But a lot of the time, we just don't recognize it. And so this is an opportunity to recognize this precious capacity that we all have for awareness. And we can do this by using our bodies as support for awareness and simply bringing awareness into our bodies. We might notice sensations, feelings of tightness. We might notice our feet on the ground. We might notice our hands resting on our legs. We might notice tension in our shoulders. Doesn't matter whether the sensations are pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. Simply using the body as support for awareness. And one of the beautiful things is that as long as we are alive, we have a body. Our minds are embodied. And so we can always come back to our body as our home, if you will, for awareness. And as we do this, our minds may get lost. We may get distracted. But the moment we come back to our bodies is a moment of awakening. And so we can gently bring the mind back to whatever we are using as support for our awareness. And this image was used before of an off-centered axle that makes everything go awry. And one of the invitations in this kind of practice is actually that we don't need to fix anything. We don't need to fix the axle. All we need to do is to become aware of it, to recognize it. And through that recognition, we can begin to experience a sense of calm, a sense of ease. And we don't need to fight with our minds. We can simply make friends with our minds. So whatever you discover when you bring awareness into your mind and your body, whatever you discover is okay. No need to fix it. Simply be aware. So we'll close this very short period of practice by simply reflecting on how we can harness whatever insight we may have gleaned from this very short period of practice together and bring it out into the world for the benefit of others. So let's spend just a moment or two reflecting on how we can harness this quality of awareness that we all have and bring it into our everyday lives to better connect with others, to be fully present for others, and to be curious about the nature of our own minds. So for those of you whose eyes are closed, you can gently open them and we can re-engage.
That was incredible. Thank you so much. In such a short time, so much can happen. I have a feeling, I mean, I detect here a secret ingredient in this recipe, and this altruism that you were just inviting us into. It seems that this duo of awareness and altruism can work wonders. And I'm wondering how do you see this? You know, how is this, why would we even want to do this? What is truly happening there that can bring us back home in a sense? Mhm.
Well, thank you for asking about that. And actually, your question gives me an invitation to introduce very briefly a framework for understanding the plasticity of well-being that we've developed in our center that actually has 4 pillars, 2 of which are awareness and what you're calling altruism. We use the term connection. It includes altruism, but it also includes qualities like compassion and kindness and appreciation and gratitude. So the first pillar is awareness. And we did a little practice to taste awareness. The second pillar we call connection, which is about these qualities that are important for healthy social relationships, but it's also connection to our place, to nature, to land. The indigenous peoples have really taught us a lot about that. The third pillar we call insight. And insight is insight into the narrative about our identities, to become aware of this narrative that we all have. Every person, the mind creates a narrative. And having awareness and insight into this narrative helps to loosen the grip that the narrative has. And finally, the last pillar of well-being is purpose. And purpose is about not so much finding something more purposeful to do with your life, but how can we find meaning and purpose in even the simple things of life? the pedestrian things, the things we do on a daily basis? Can washing the dishes be connected deeply to your sense of purpose? And of course it could be. It just requires a little bit of reframing. And so we've actually developed a whole program around these 4 pillars of well-being called the Healthy Minds Program. We've put it into an app that is freely available throughout the world called the Healthy Minds Program. And so I would encourage listeners who are curious about this to please download the app. It's totally free. And you also can take a little assessment which can tell you how you're doing on each of these 4 pillars, and you can take it repeatedly over time so that you can track your progress.
Thank you so much for guidance. And I have a little thing here. You know, we were talking about this bad axle space, and the ancient contemplatives called the opposite sukha, or actually what means a good axle space, making for a nice ride where you can navigate and easily. So I'm wondering, I'm looking at it from the perspective of the listeners. What is it costing us to not go there, to not check out these experiences, techniques, and methods, and to reveal our true or natural state in terms of, you know, cost benefit? Why would we even want to be curious, as you said? Why do we want to go there? What is it costing us?
You mean, what is the benefit? I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
Yeah,
Why
like
are we not getting?
yes,
Yeah,
for somebody, like if you had to explain to somebody, look, you are losing money because here are your habits, here are your spending habits. So how can we pique this interest? Because habit is strong. And so in order to overcome this force of habit, it seems that we human beings would need a little something, you know, what is there? What is this good axle space? You know, what is this sense of well-being and flourishing that you're exploring through your work that would make listeners want to do it? You know, what would you say? What are we missing by not doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the average person, so not for a policymaker, for example, but just for the average person, this is really about a path to genuine happiness and well-being, rather than the delusional thinking that material possessions, for example, will somehow make us more happy, and there's abundant evidence that they don't. This is really the key to genuine, enduring well-being. And so, as you were alluding to earlier, if we're all honest with ourselves, all of us are suffering. And I think that if we recognize that, if we open up to our own suffering sufficiently, then we will be motivated to search for strategies that really can produce genuine, enduring well-being, so that our happiness is not subject to external circumstances, because external circumstances change and they are impermanent. And research shows that even for a person who wins the lottery, you know, wins $10 million, we can say definitively, based on hard-nosed research, that, you know, their happiness goes up briefly and then it comes right back down to where they were, often below, and so that they really become miserable. So it's so that's one thing. The second thing is that one of the things we know is that well-being and flourishing is actually connected to our physical health, to our longevity. And so if we want to live healthy lives and live longer, one of the keys for doing that is to cultivate these skills of flourishing.
Okay, I am sold. Thank you so much. I'll turn it over to Dr. Ben Isbell and Kirsten.
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard. That's been really wonderful. And I'd just like to say, for anybody thinking it's what Richard's introduced us to is too simple, how could this possibly work? Because as Richard said, you don't need anything. It works when the batteries go flat because we can still do it anywhere, anytime. It's the simplicity is the key, because as Richard explains, tapping into awareness is the unlocking ourselves from these automatic habitual patterns, giving us the independence and autonomy to make choices, as Richard said, in the face of our changing external world. So please try that. And thank you so much, Richard, for this wonderful discussion and introducing us to some of your work and some of the techniques.
You're most welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Richard. And just for all of our viewers, so it's the Healthy Minds app that they can go onto and explore this path to well-being. And also Bardo Cafe has an Instagram page, which is called the Bardo Cafe, if you'd like to follow us. We are definitely aiming to do more of these interviews, exploring Dukkha, like Jigme Sogyal already mentioned, and giving people a path to well-being and some tools that they can use to experience more happiness in their life. So thank you so much, Richard, and Jigme Sogyal and Ben as well. Really amazing talk. Very, very informative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Please
much.
try this at home. Yes.
Thank you.